Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader Reading Books for You. Today I will be reading Chapter 9, Hope, from Tested Love by Liv Donata. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links for me to find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hope. Today was the day. They would finally get to meet with the governor and present their evidence. Robert had taken the day off work, and Sadie was nervous with anticipation. She had been a nervous wreck for the past week, spending her mornings puking and her evenings lying in bed trying to feel right again. Their meeting was in less than an hour, and they were just waiting for their security team to escort them to the governor's mansion. Sadie made her way to the foyer to meet Robert when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Robert peeked his head through the front curtains, and as he emerged, he said, "They are here, sweetheart. Let's go." Sadie sighed in relief and took a deep breath before making her way to the front door to lock arms with Robert. They walked through the team of armed guards, locking the door behind them. As they walked to the car, the security formed a wall around them, and it finally dawned on Sadie what she was about to do. She was about to go against everything she was ever taught about her society. She was tempting a tired lion awake. The drive didn't take long. Thankfully, Sadie and Robert lived close to the governor's area downtown. The governor had a substantial estate. Sadie was used to living in large houses on large plots of land, but even this would make her turn an eye. The pathway to the front doors was lined in multicolored rose bushes. The gates were lined in gold, and the main house seemed to be many stories high. Sadie wondered how a state official financed such a luxurious place. Robert, Sadie, and their security stood in a clump on the governor's front lawn, waiting for his assistants to open the door. Soon the door popped open, and the governor, the mayor, and their assistants were revealed sitting in the meeting room off to the side of the foyer. They were all ushered inside and offered chairs and beverages. Sadie and Robert were sat across from the governor and mayor. The governor lifted a glass of water to his lips and took a sip to wet his lips. The whole room quieted from its bustling as his demeanor demanded attention. "I've reviewed the situation," he said, "and I believe we only have one course of action." Sadie and Robert shifted in their seats in anticipation. "Through my research, I believe this to be a deep state issue. Any attempt to immediately present it to the federal lawmakers would most likely end badly, as I'm sure there are policymakers very aware of the issue already. I believe they would most likely shoot down any bills proposed to reverse the law because they have a personal stake in it. Our best course of action is to alert the surrounding states of the issue, give them the proof, and see if we can get a consensus of states willing and able to overturn the decision on their own. If enough states agree, then the issue will be automatically resolved on a federal level. Do you agree this is the way to go?" Sadie and Robert nodded their heads in agreement with the room, and the governor continued. "We'll start with petitions and calls to other state officials. It could also help if we get media attention drawn to the issue. The more people aware, the better. We could get you on the news telling your story next." Sadie didn't know how to feel about telling her story. It didn't feel like it was just hers. It didn't feel right to explain her life with Clark and their matching without him present. But she had to do anything that could help. The governor and constituents were silent for a moment as he flipped through some of his papers on the desk. He finally spoke and said, "Our goal would be to get a majority of states behind us and propose a bill that is already being voted on through the states, so on a federal level they have no other choice but to expunge it fairly, even despite the shifty practices. This law they encouraged is also severely outdated. It doesn't bring into account the rights of the women. It affects or even accounts for same-sex marriage in its practices. It's time to make these changes." Sadie's heart sank as the weight of his words became anchors. "We will need a name for the bill as we pass it around to the states," he said. "Does anyone have any suggestions?" Sadie straightened up as the words fell from her mouth like water from a fountain. She said, "Clark's bill." Sadie turned to Robert as he reached under the table for her hand. They looked into each other's eyes and agreed. The rest of the room stood behind her as well. There was a story to tell about all the stories that hadn't been told, and Sadie was going to tell it. The room quieted down, and they shook hands as the meeting ended. Sadie stood up to bid the governor and mayor farewell when suddenly she felt faint. The whole room turned dark as Sadie fell. When Sadie awoke, she was in a hospital bed with Robert nervous by her side. A doctor pulled the curtain open to her area with a smile on his face. Sadie was confused as the doctor spoke. He said, "Well, you had a bit of low blood pressure, so we ran some tests, and Mrs. Hodges, you're pregnant." Sadie's face filled with surprise as Robert jumped up and smiled, pulling Sadie into an embrace. They held hands as the doctor continued saying, "We can give you some meds to regulate your blood pressure that won't harm the baby." Sadie and Robert nodded as Robert caressed Sadie's stomach. He would be a father. Sadie would be a mother. It was all so amazing and hard to process. It felt like their lives had started in a flash. Sadie smiled as she began to think of the possibilities. If it was a boy, she'd raise him as a gentleman, enroll him in sports, and buy his outfits and polos. If it were a girl, she would teach her to stand up for herself, how to be generous, ladylike, and proud. Most of all, she hoped to raise her children happy and make them feel accepted in the world, unlike she had felt growing up. She would teach them they were more than marriage and money. They were their passions and their dreams. Sadie was overjoyed as she was discharged from the hospital. She began to daydream of the life she was creating. Happiness was no longer in the future. Happiness was here. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the next chapter. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.